Welcome back to Killer POV. I'm Elric Kane, and I am joined by two wonderful co-hosts, Rob Galluzzo of FEARnet and Icons of Fright.
Howdy.
And Rebekah McKendry of Pregnancy and Future Child Marnie and Fangoria.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
We're good. I was really disappointed because we did the Street Trash screening at Jump Cut, and I was disappointed that Rebekah, she walked out in the middle of it. I thought this is it. I thought she was giving birth during Street Trash.
We did. We thought she was going to give birth.
I was just really offended by the film, guys. I can't handle that type of violence.
And not only that, she's the one who provided the disc.
I know.
Then
it was actually my movie, and I have autographed copies of the posters, but this time it just really got to
And
me.
her thumbprint froze the film.
I had been having practice contractions all day, and we got there, and I was like, Mike Mendez was sitting in front of me, and I was like, Mike, I'm going to go at some point during this movie. I know it. And we're due like any day now, and contractions got really heavy during the movie, and I elbowed Dave and was like, we got to go. And then we go running out, and I go home, and we packed all of our bags and took the dogs to the kennel, and we were like ready to go. And then I was like, I'm going to be at the hospital for a couple of days. I took a nice hot shower, and the contractions stopped.
There's no horror in that whole story.
No, I know. It should be like,
And then Dave ate her stomach as she slept. And so let's, because of that anticlimax,
sorry.
we're gonna have to wait a couple more weeks. Instead of that, what did you watch that was interesting?
Well, I watched actually. This week was it wasn't very climactic for me either, because it was like my weird catch-up week. I realized when I was watching the Oscars a couple weeks ago that I had missed all of these non-horror movies, because with Fango, because it's my job to watch horror movies, I watch like 2 or 3 a day. And then by the end of the day, I'm just watching Biggest Loser because I don't want to watch anything important. And so I never end up watching anything that isn't horror. So this week I watched Argo, Hangover 2, and Beasts of the Southern Wild, all of which have nothing to do with this podcast.
Wow.
But I did watch, just because it was free on Hulu last night, I rewatched The Faculty.
Okay.
Which had come out, in like 98, I think, and directed by Robert Rodriguez. And I didn't realize kind of what an all-star cast that was, and what a kind of good movie it is. I was really happy.
I remember enjoying it, having fun. I don't remember it being excellent, but I remember enjoying it.
That's exactly it.
John Stewart with an eye patch, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's all I remember.
And Selma Hayek's in it.
Yeah, the time it came out, I remember not digging it, only because I was a horror snob and I thought it was like an amalgamation of every other movie that I love. Like there's totally a Thing scene in there where they're doing the test or whatever.
They take cocaine, or I think it's meth of some type.
Yeah, that was the point where I was slowly starting to turn on Kevin Williamson, being like, wait a minute, I think he's just copying movies I love.
Right.
But I'm sure now in retrospect, if I watched it, I'd probably dig it.
But I did watch one like totally obscure one, but I'll save that for the end.
Okay, when we get to cult stuff.
I'll save it right till we go into the cult stuff.
Did anyone bother seeing Last Exorcism 2?
I read my good friend Uncle Creepy's review of it.
That stopped me too.
Where he said Last Exorcism 2 makes Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D look like Citizen Kane. And that kind of made me say, you know what? They didn't have a free screening of Last Exorcism 2. Usually, like Rob, Elric, and I will get to go to these free screenings to see movies before they come out, and they didn't have one for Last Exorcism 2, which means I now have to shell out like $15 of my own hard-earned cash to go see it, and I was kind of not into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never heard from you, so I was like,
yeah, we had plans. We were going to go see it, and then
by Monday I was like, yeah, whatever.
I didn't see a single positive, and that's always tough. If you don't see one dissenting review, that always makes you wonder.
Well, it's only been a few days, and somebody already tweeted today, hey, remember Last Exorcism?
Yeah.
When we get to the news, I've got lots of box office information on it, so we'll save that for news. But did anybody see Stoker?
No, I haven't seen Stoker.
I'm going to see it. Hopefully this weekend.
No, okay. I didn't see it yet either, but I did see. There were 3 things I wanted to talk about. The first was this past weekend was the first Cinemayhem Film Festival, which was curated and put together by Heather Wixon from Dread Central.
I love Heather Wixon.
Yeah, Heather's awesome, and it was a pretty cool event. It was 2 days at a theater in Thousand Oaks. Really nice theater, a little bit out of the way, but if you made the trek, it was a really beautiful theater and some pretty good selections. The one movie that I was stoked to see and really impressed by was Cold Water, which is the new one by Dave Parker. Not to be confused with some drama called Cold Water that's playing South by Southwest next week, apparently.
This is the Hills That Run Red director.
Yes. Yeah. Dave did the Hills Run Red, which is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated slashers of the last decade. Really, really cool stuff. And Cold Water is, just to, I know I may be biased because I know Dave, but I had seen, he did this kind of experimental movie for, I think I could say, for like 10 grand, meant to kind of be in the vein of, somewhere between a home invasion thing and like a paranormal activity kind of idea, like one setting and just like some weird, creepy stuff going on.
Is it found footage?
Yeah, only elements of it are. Like the guy does film himself, but it's definitely more of a narrative and it's made that way. But it was very experimental, and he, I saw a very, very early rough cut of it maybe 2 years ago when he first shot it with no score and just kind of like the basic beats. And the version he showed this weekend was a complete version, and I was really impressed. And actually, I think Justin did the sound design on it.
Did Justin Cruz, our
sound guy,
did the sound design?
He probably didn't walk out of that job. It's just this job that he walks
After 10 minutes, Justin's going to go get a sandwich.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
But no, I was really impressed with what Dave did with that movie, the final version. And it's hard to talk about it without spoiling it because every few minutes it keeps changing shift of what you think it's going to be. At first you're like, all right, this is going to be like a paranormal activity ghost story. But then like there's a storyline with like some criminals on the loose. You're like, all right, I guess this is going to be home invasion. And it just keeps shifting like what direction you think it's going to be. And then when it kind of does get revealed, it's not at all what you think it was. So I know that's as vague an explanation as I can give you, but I'm just...
Does he have distribution on it yet?
No, not yet. He's still kind of showing it around.
Nice.
So
okay, I got to check this one out.
Yeah.
So you said you had two other...
So
one more.
One. The other ones will be far shorter, I promise. 2 was Rec 3. I finally got to see Rec 3 because they just added it to Netflix Instant.
Bride with Chainsaw?
Loved it. I love the first 2 movies. The first Rec is probably one of my favorite found footage movies.
Yeah, I think it's the best one.
Yeah, it's great. And I'd heard mixed things about 3. I heard people liked it, people didn't like it.
I'm mixed on it too. I didn't like when it switched. I don't know why. I just threw it. Just something about it didn't.
See, I loved that because it was like it's about 15, 20 minutes into the movie. It switches from found footage to
regular
traditional narrative. But I love the way they did it, which is essentially because I always forget when they go that long without putting the title up. So it's like found footage, and then the guy's like, I have to shoot everything. And like at this point, because it's so played out, the lead guy's like, put the stupid camera down, and then it switches to narrative movie.
It was a good idea to do it that way. I don't know why.
Cool.
Maybe I was unprepared for that expectation or something.
Yeah. The thing that stood out to me that I liked about it is it didn't ignore the rules set up by the first or the second one.
Exactly.
That
was the cool thing.
Yeah, because they were going to say it's a prequel, so they could have, just done a straightforward kind of like, zombie thing or whatever. But they had kind of the whole religious element and, the
weird
creature
supernatural
that controls them all and all that. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah,
they couldn't go in the church.
The first 2 do set up some really strange rules for zombie films that, it was kind of nice to see him adhere to.
Yeah, so I really loved it. I thought it was great.
Maybe I'll watch again.
And Bride with a Chainsaw.
They would play really well together. I mean, seeing those 3 films together would actually be a great way to see them, unlike some sequels. You couldn't sit that long in those chairs.
Well, they're all like 75 minutes long. It'd be.
I think they would screen pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Was that the whole 3? Or
the last thing I saw was the Bates Motel pilot, which is now.
Where did you get to see that?
If you're a Comcast, it's available on Comcast On Demand 2 weeks early.
Oh wow! I'm one of those horrible people with no cable.
I thought everything was Time Warner out here.
I guess it is, but one of my coworkers has Comcast and was able to queue it up on my computer. So as soon as I heard, obviously I made a doc on Psycho, so I was very stoked to see it. And it's different. It's very different, but I really dug it. It's the first half is kind of slow, and it takes a little bit to get used to the idea that this is now Norman Bates and his mother. But once, there's a really interesting turning point in the middle of the pilot that's really messed up. And once that happens, from there on, it's just like I was definitely kind of on the edge of my seat. Like, oh, okay, this is not the movie versions at all. It's going to be radically different, but I'm kind of into it. I want to be surprised. I don't want it to be exactly what the movie.
I didn't know there were central characters. I thought it was just going to be like a Twilight Zone with different stories happening.
No. It's a retelling of. It's technically the prequel story if it took place in modern time. So Norman has a brother. He goes to high school.
Wow.
All the girls are kind of into him because he's a cute, shy, kid.
Weird.
It's very bizarre, but it's interesting. It's really cool. And it ended, like every good pilot should, it left me really wanting more.
Cool.
And I think it's going to be a 10-episode run. So,
interesting.
we got a whole season to look forward to.
I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, I was curious. I didn't know much about it. I saw I pinpointed a subgenre of cinema that I'd never thought about before, but because a couple weeks ago I watched Haunting of Julia and was full circle, and I was really blown away by it. So Netflix led me to a film like it, because Netflix tells you, if you like this, you'll like this. Netflix is wrong in this case when it led me to Robert Wise's Audrey Rose.
You didn't like Audrey
well,
Rose?
Here's the thing. I thought the start was a great opening and great idea, but it just continually failed to create. It would like build this tension, but the tension would never really eventuate. The payoff was never felt like it felt maybe misplaced because of the genre, because it kind of doesn't. It's really more like a drama. It felt a bit TV movie-ish too. I think Robert Wise is a great editor, especially. I mean, he's a great director too with The Haunting. But the start and the concept of this girl who basically dies in the opening car crash, and then then Anthony Hopkins is the father whose daughter had died, and he becomes obsessed by this family, and he says, "I've traced you. Your daughter's my daughter," you know, and it feels like it should be better. But what I realized is, I think this is an actual hang-up for me. So I started looking and realizing that the subgenre that is reincarnation horror, I have a problem with.
Really? The whole subgenre?
No, I started because when I saw Birth by Jonathan Glazer, I remember loving the style of it. Thought it was one of the most beautiful films I'd seen in years. But I didn't like the film, and I didn't know what it was about the film. But they always left me kind of unnerved, not scared, not dread-induced, none of that. Nothing what I look for in a horror film, but it left me feeling weird. And then I started looking at other lists of films. Dead Again by Kenneth Branagh, which plays out as a really actually kind of noirish and is actually a pretty good film. But I remember having a similar feeling with that film. Then I realized Bram Stoker's Dracula also has themes of reincarnation, because they believe that what's the actress's name? Winona Ryder's character has been around eternally. And then there's a Japanese film that I haven't seen yet called Reincarnation. But I was starting to go, I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's because I don't believe in reincarnation. So watching a film where, especially Audrey Rose, where it's played completely straight, that everyone should just go, oh yeah, of course, yeah, it should be reincarnation. And there is obviously a big difference between reincarnation films and possession films, which Full Circle was. It was more of a possession of a woman that they weren't. You know, it wasn't a reincarnation. So
you don't like Dracula because of that?
Well, no, that's just one element. I do like that film. I'm just thinking it was one.
That's one.
I was just tracking the broader, going, oh, what else is? So I literally started making a list, trying to find reincarnation. Embraces the Vampire with Alyssa Milano nude. Makes me feel weird for other reasons.
I couldn't understand why anybody wouldn't like that one.
No, that one I have no problem. But I don't know. I probably it's just a couple of these films. But Birth and Audrey Rose both left me feeling very similarly, and they both deal with that topic. And I think part of it is in the way that it is kind of accepted. Oh yeah, reincarnation, and I start thinking about it, and it just, I don't know. But Robert Wise, there's a couple of beautiful scenes in that film, but it just, as a film, I was just left kind of, is that all there was? So that's it. Reincarnation horror cinema. I haven't seen the book yet, so somebody can now write that book or that chapter for Fangoria.
We'll start on it now.
And we can move on, which takes us to something we wanted to talk about before we bring in our guest, who will be the brain, well, one of the minds behind a favorite film of all of ours that we all got to see this week, called Street Trash, Mr. Roy Frumkes. But first, we are going to kind of touch the topic of what is a cult film, and especially maybe in the modern context when things are so much more accessible, I guess, how we define it, and what kind of films maybe we like that haven't been picked up as accepted cult films yet. I'm curious if you guys have personal favorites that aren't Big Lebowski and aren't, Repo the Genetic Opera, haven't hit that level.
Well, I was going to use one of the films that I watched this week as kind of the segue. So I watched this film, which I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen. I hope so, because it stars Anthony Perkins. Edge of Sanity from 1989. Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you, Rob. You've seen it.
Yeah.
This is one that I saw this week, and I saw it because we're actually, the book that I'm working on right now, we included it in there because it's so hard to find. Nobody can hunt it down. And it's so freaking weird. It's a Jekyll and Hyde story, and it's kind of set in Victorian times, but it's Victorian through a very 1980s kind of punk lens. So instead of Victorian dresses, it's kind of more mesh and neon Victorian. And instead of just a traditional Jekyll and Hyde of Jekyll, taking the medicine and then going out and becoming Hyde and killing prostitutes, I mean, he gets into some crazy fucked up shit fetish stuff. So it's definitely Anthony Perkins, taking a deep, deep turn.
And it's Hyde is Jack the Ripper. That's the twist on it.
Yeah.
It's Jekyll and Hyde if Hyde is Jack the Ripper.
I feel like I would have seen this years ago, but it sounds
so
good.
Weird.
I'm ready to see it.
And it's so strangely sexualized in a very unsexual manner, like you need a shower when you finish watching it type movie. And so I watched this, and then we were talking about what is a cult film, and it started me wondering, is this a cult film? Because it's completely, unheard of. It's really hard to find. It takes some effort to hunt it down. Very few people have seen it, but in that regards, there's no cult.
Right.
It's like me and Rob.
It's the difference between cult and obscure. And I think a lot of us covet things, horror fans more than anything, probably because we go to conventions, we get signature. And I know for me, Possession, I saw Possession when I was about 18 in New Zealand, and it was easier to find there than it was in America all these years. And I remember watching it once and then had to buy it anytime I saw it, anytime I had a copy, never rewatched it again. But I felt like I needed anything to do with it, and I was totally obsessed by it. And I was mostly obsessed, I think, because no one else could see it. And so it somehow, without wanting to, I didn't consciously say, I feel special because I've seen this great film. But when it did come out this year at the cinema, I was disappointed. And when everyone else liked it, I was really disappointed and felt let down. But in a way, it's a good, it's a good thing. So I do think there's obscure cinema that we all enjoy because it feels like we've discovered a treasure. And then there's the cult, which is when we, I guess, elevate something that we collectively decide should have been discovered.
But I really think that there is an important element of it being an unknown media, because for me, like, a cult is changing slightly, but I know, like, when I was in college, a cult was something that had to be kind of rhizomatic. Like, it was passed in like a root-like structure, like, watch this, now you watch this, now you watch this, slowly growing, but never really having like a mainstream release. And that's kind of how it was for me. Like, I know a big one when I was in college was Jessica White on The Dancing Outlaw. Not horror, but
I remember Dancing
I remember it getting passed around, on VHS tapes to everybody.
Kind of like pre-YouTube. It was kind of thing that would have been a hit on YouTube.
South Park Spirit of Christmas got passed around like that too, I remember. And so that kind of passing it from person to person, or, oh my God, what you should watch. You should check out this movie. Where it's much more like a word of mouth thing.
Yeah.
The holy fucking shit factor. I think that's a real factor. I think we often look for things that when we give it to someone, it's like, it has that holy fucking shit.
Yeah.
This has got something crazy in it.
You have to see this.
Yeah, and that's why something like even Showgirls, even though I think it even applies to things like Big Lebowski and Showgirls, that there's this quality to them that's almost unbelievable. Big Lebowski is just a great film, but it didn't do well.
Yeah,
if it was,
Showgirls is on my list right here of my favorite cult films.
Oh, really?
So.
See, I don't think I could ever watch that one again, even if it is a cult film.
I actually watched it recently for the first time in its entirety because I'd only seen bits of it. And it was only because I went with my buddy Zane to go see his sister perform a 30-minute musical version of it. So I was like, we should probably watch the movie so we get the jokes in this thing. And it's interesting. It's the best word I could use. All I know is it's really long because I remember like a half hour into it, I was like, holy fuck, this movie's over 2 hours.
It feels like an epic.
Yeah.
I always really think that it's Verhoeven, and that if you watch Starship Troopers and then watch Showgirls and think of them in the same vein of, how you're supposed to get it, this kind of tongue-in-cheek, over-the-topness, it makes so much more sense, and it becomes such a different level of film.
Well, and then there's these weird subgenres, so bad it's good.
I don't know if I believe in the so bad.
Right. No, I know. I think I remember you saying that. And I'm not saying whether you do, but obviously there is a factor that people enjoy something. Yeah. They're laughing at it, maybe.
So like The Room, or even Birdemic.
There's, Troll 2. But actually Troll 2, I don't think it's because it's so bad. I think Troll 2 actually is incredibly funny in its way. I wouldn't be laughing at it. I'm laughing because it's kind of amazing that it exists.
Right.
But I don't know. What are some of your kind of cult interests?
I'll say I'm, and I know we're going to talk about modern cult stuff later, but I haven't seen Birdemic yet. I mean, I'll watch it before we have the Birdemic producer on, but stuff like that in The Room, I've purposely avoided because I don't like movies that are like kind of forced into cult status. You know what I mean? Like that's I don't know. Everyone's like, "Oh, Birdemic is so awful, you have to see it." But The Room is so bad, you have to watch it. And it's like
Miami Connection's one like that too.
I don't know if The Room is so bad that was forced. And I think The Room is the Citizen Kane of bad films in the sense that it's at every choice they make, it feels off, and there's something fascinating about watching. I don't think it's Birdemic. I totally see your argument on that. If you watch The Room, I think you'll find it's kind of fascinating. It's literally, there's a guy out there who thought he was Tennessee Williams, and he makes this or Marlon Brando mixed in one, and he makes and directs this film, and you watch the film, and dramatically your jaw just drops the ground. It's amazing. It's not amazing even because it's bad, like haha, you're a bad filmmaker. It's just amazing. I really believe that. It's just, there's a quality to it that's can't be replicated. It's crazy.
Let me put it in a slightly different context, because when I used to work at Amoeba, I worked in the cult section, and The Room was in the cult section, and I cannot tell you how many copies we sold every night, to the point that we would run out of it all the time. And part of me working there is like, there's so many other movies in this section that are actual good, legitimate, great movies, and you guys are flushing your money down the toilet because that's the thing. It's like I see these people, this is so bad, we got to buy it. And it's like,
why, Lisa? Why?
Just give me your $20 if that's your attitude. Right. If you care that little about money.
But that's a good thing. It's your job to direct them, to better stuff. That's what we can do right now. Let's do that.
A good cult
Let's
movie
give some
in
cult
the section,
films we like.
which I think it's a cult movie, River's Edge.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that is a good movie.
One of the first movies with Keanu Reeves, Crispin Glover.
I can't believe that's considered cult now.
Yeah,
it's fringe. I think it's also this word fringe that maybe we need to bring in as well, because it's kind of fringe from the mainstream films that people know, and it's even fringe for cult. I mean, again, the argument would be made that it's not a cult film if people haven't discovered it.
Right.
I mean, we've discovered it. This is where it kind of is it obscure cinema or is it cult cinema? That's. I mean, I think this is a good argument for films that should be
cult.
Right. Which makes sense.
That's not even a horror movie. If I had to pick like something horror and it's more of a horror comedy, I'd go with Frankenhooker.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull out the heady because I did Aristotle and Freud last week. That's fun. Here's my heady. This is the definition that I used in my dissertation. Was that
last year at Marienbad is a cult film. The elliptical nature of Renee's editing is. Is that what she's gonna go?
No, I wasn't going to Marienbad yet. Maybe in a bit. But I was just gonna say that I think that in order for something to truly be a cult film, that it has to inspire people to take a movement past just watching it. It can't just be, I'm sitting here casually watching this movie. Oh yeah, hey, this is a cool movie. It's pretty cool. Or I like it because I'm so bad, or it's because it's so bad. It's got to be something like, well, the one that everybody points to, Rocky Horror or Repo, where they're actually, making people do something, or Big Lebowski. And I mean, and that does get into some weird lines, because I know, like, when I was looking up today, somebody was like, Grey Gardens is the best cult film. And I was like, there's not exactly like a Grey Gardens Con 2013 or anything like that.
That's funny. I can't believe that's considered cult. That's interesting.
I couldn't either.
No, but I like that idea that it's something that makes them almost want to become active members.
Even
I like
if
that.
It's cool. Just blogging about it, or a lot of people write fan fiction, or just I'm going to buy that on a T-shirt and things like that. I think that our movements can be smaller, but I mean, I own a Street Trash T-shirt, so I would put that into the category.
Let's because we do want to get Roy in here in a sec, but what are a few titles that you like personally that you could imagine have that kind of appeal, that could become that kind of appeal? Are there any others?
God, go to Rebekah. I need to think about this.
Okay,
I keep thinking of things that are not horror.
Yeah, mine aren't horror either, and I'll say that, but there's a reason for that, because when I looked up today what cult horror films were, these are the titles that kept coming up over and over. Reanimator, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shingler, Eraserhead Scream, Shaun of the Dead, and Videodrome.
The Shingler?
The Tingler.
Oh.
Tingler.
The whole time I was like, a guy with shingles. Vincent Price with shingles. The lights turn out. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, I don't look at things like Shaun of the Dead, Scream, or Reanimator as cult films in any way. But to people outside of the horror genre, I think they probably are. So I have to look at other genres and say, okay, well, that's a cult film to me. So Avenging Disco Godfather is probably my favorite of all time. It's blaxploitation, Rudy Ray Moore from the 70s. Legend of Billie Jean, I love. I will also add in Legend of Billy Jack is a great one. And Return to Oz, which I could make a strong defense that it's horror.
Yeah, especially if you're on a different show that wasn't horror-based.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
I didn't really think that deeply about what should be. I just thought there's some movies I've seen where I'm like, Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. I remember seeing that on TV and going, how the hell had I never seen this film? Like, it was beautifully made, surreal dream sequences like, I think the girl's teaching and she falls backwards into the blackboard and it becomes a pool of water. I mean, and Michael Ironside as a principal, to me, I'm there, you know, especially if he's the same guy from Visiting Hours walking right into it. But that film really surprised me. I only saw it a couple years ago. Possession by Zulawski is one. And there's this film that I grew up watching a lot on, and it's sometimes weird because my VHS generation was in a different country, so sometimes I'm not sure if it was as popular here, but it's a bad film, but there's something about it I always liked, which was Slaughter High. And I think
I've never seen Slaughter High.
Slaughter High is the reason it's so weird. For one, he's a jester getting revenge on all these students who abused him. But
that's totally
for that generic slasher subgenre, I found it interesting because it's all British actors, all pretending to be American.
Right.
It's like the ultimate American high school film, but everyone in it, and it's made in England.
And one of them is Carolyn Monroe.
Carolyn Monroe's one.
Who we're supposed to believe is a teenager.
Yeah, as a teenager.
Oh, wow.
And they're all kind of that kind of cast. We're like, oh, okay.
And it's another Vestron video, which we can talk about soon. It was Vestron, and the guy who played Marty majored in cutting classmates. Was the tagline. The guy who played Marty committed suicide right after the film's release.
Yeah.
Oh
which added another eerie, sometimes the real life stuff that filters in with the movies is part of what leads
part of what
these
you
things
hear
to
about
cult.
it, yeah. Because that's what I remember hearing about is like, oh, the killer from that movie.
Yeah, it died. But there was something about that film. I'm not by any means suggesting it's a great film, but it was one I watched a lot and thought a lot about, more than I should. Probably because there's nudity in the first 5 minutes. And the kind of kid I was. But you know, let's try to broaden this about, you know, also accessibility in cult. I think is a good lead off to bring in our guest, because he had a film that, you know, seems like it was always really popular to me growing up on video, but for a long time it wasn't even something you could get. So joining us now is Mr. Roy Frumkes.
Hello.
Welcome
Roy.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here with the four of you.
Yay.
So you've been sitting patiently, quietly listening. So I figured the way the show works is now you get to abruptly
explode out with everything.
teach us something.
Well, I'm a teacher, but
That's
I don't
right.
know that I'll teach you anything. But those were wonderful ideas floating around. You know, it made me think about my own definitions and what's cult and what isn't. And
Do you think
none of the
Street
ones you wrote down strike me as cult?
Me neither.
They're
That's
all-
why I was so shocked by him. Yeah, I could maybe Videodrome, maybe a tiny bit, but only because of the themes, not because of its availability or the fan pull.
Well, also, I just think mainstream cancels out cult.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And success.
Yeah, and those are all fall into that category, except maybe Videodrome.
Yep. So, but I always wonder if I'm just biased because I'm part of the genre. So I look at the genre and I'm like, oh, well, of course, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like our Citizen Kane here. So we've made 3 Citizen Kane comparisons since the show started. I just like to say
It's that kind of horror podcast. But I mean, with your own film, it wasn't available for many years, even though in my mind, it's always been out there. Why was that?
I owned it, and I was being selective about who would get it.
Were you growing the cult? Do you think that helps? Do you think that helps pull in interest?
I didn't do it for that reason.
Right, but do you think it does?
It certainly made the distribution companies eager to get it. There was a lot of people out there asking for it. It came out originally through Vestron, as you mentioned, and very few producers put into their agreements a recapture clause, which means if the company goes out of business, the film reverts to the owners. And we had signed a 20-year licensing agreement with Vestron, and they went out of business within 2 years after that. And I just took it back. You know, I got the negative out of their hands, and that was it. You know, it then went to Live Entertainment, and then Live went belly up, and then it went to Lionsgate. You know, but fortunately, Street Trash didn't travel with it. So I got it back, and then it was just kind of waiting for the right deal.
What made you pick?
Sorry that I made you all wait.
Yeah, exactly.
It was worth it. What made you pick Synapse to do the ultimate DVD release?
Geez, they've released 5 of my films. They're a very dedicated small group of 2. And
Jerry and Don are amazing people.
Yeah, I mean, and they just, you know, they would fly me in. I would supervise the high-def mastering, and then I was doing Meltdown Memoirs, and they just kind of waited for a year or 2 until I finished it without bugging me. You know, very, very lovely people.
And making that documentary, which is on the 2-disc set, through making that, did you discover, I mean, is Street Trash, in fact, something that you would even think of as a cult film? Do you think it has that audience base, or what was your experience making that film all these years later?
Well, no one ever uttered the word while we were shooting it. But I certainly think it's a cult film now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like part of it, obviously, we were talking about is whether you're successful on your initial like theatrical release. And Street Trash, what were some of the things that hurt Street Trash in the theatrical side?
Vestron, possibly they lost faith in it, but also they were a company that was desperately seeking a hit, and they got it just before Street Trash opened, which was Dirty Dancing. And then,
wow.
and then their whole attitude changed. They didn't want to insult the critics. I mean, we had a really raunchy, profane publicity campaign planned for that film. I mean, we had a great publicist, David Whitten, who was involved with the Last House on the Left, keep repeating it's a movie, and the barf bags. And I mean, he's just a guy with brilliant ideas. And that was the reason I went with Vestron, because of him, not because of the company.
What were some of his ideas?
He asked me to get quotes from the people I knew, Romero, Savini, Wes Craven, all those people, and so I sent copies of the film around, and I'm just remembering some of their reactions. But they gave us good quotes, obviously. And then we sent it to the critics, who we knew would hate it, And so Whitten's plan for the New York Times was a full page, and it would be split down the center, all of the good reviews from the horror film, from the exploitation filmmakers, then all the terrible reviews from the critics, and then it would say, what side of the street are you on?
That's cool.
It's a lovely idea, but you can see where Vestron no longer wanted to offend the critics.
Right.
So they pulled back on that. Am I allowed to curse on that?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
And that's just what I was going to say. The Village Voice, they were going to take out a full-page ad saying, Street Trash, fuck you. They were going to send 10,000 copies. You know the song at the end, sung by Tony Darrow? Wonderful. They were going to send 10,000 copies around the country to the stations and call him the godfather of gore. And it was just this lovely list of things they were going to do to promote it that all would have, I think, worked.
Right.
And every last one of them was canceled. And we premiered it at Lincoln Center. Talk about an odd combination.
How did you guys get into Lincoln Center to do the premiere?
That's Whitten and his group,
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we all drove up on garbage trucks in tuxedos.
Oh, that's so cool.
And the very next day, Whitten quit. Like he was so offended by what the company had undercut his work.
Right.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And that's in the film, actually, in the Meltdown Memoirs. You could see the look in his eyes, how strung out he was.
It's like an artist of his own kind. That's cool. One thing that I was always thinking about while watching Street Trash this last time was especially casting Street Trash. I mean, there's not many people you recognize, and it's one of those films that feels very authentic.
Yeah,
for some
reason, I always assumed that they were like real street people that you guys just pulled off the street, but they're actors.
Yes, there were no street people in the
really?
film. Yeah.
Oh, I thought a couple of them were.
But they were all fairly obscure. I mean, like Nicole Potter, who plays the Wynette, right, who gets thrown against the wall and melts in the end. We put up signs in anorexic clinics.
Oh, my gosh.
And she came our way. And Bill Cheppel, who plays the cop, he was a super cop. His beat was 8th Avenue and Times Square. I mean, he really, the stuff he had to do in Street Trash was not up to the stuff he did in real life. Vic Noto was in Nam. And he would constantly come into the office and say, "Look, we should kill some animals and eat them. As long as we're eating them, it's legal. Yeah, we can kill animals on film as long as we eat them. And I'd say, interesting, Vic. And then we were shooting the Vietnam sequences out on Long Island in a place that looked close. And he was saying, "No, there's a place in Florida." He was coming up with but he was very contributive. I mean.
It's like you cast method. Like you have all these people who really live these roles.
Strange about that,
The cop, one of the most fun things in your documentary. I just saw this last night, so it's fresh. But the cop, he had this beautiful passage where he just says, because he's tough. Now he's like weightlifting, and he's probably late 60s.
Yeah.
And he's just like, even though I'm a deeply conservative person, and I think everyone should go straight from high school and be a cop for a year in New York.
Yeah.
And I'm a conservative man. Even though I think every person on Earth should get to experience that. that experience of being the center of things, being elevated for a second, and being on screen. It was the most special time. And it really, I really liked how he put
poetic.
it. Yeah, it was interesting. Like, it really meant a lot to him, in that film.
They were all lovely, eloquent people, not necessarily intellectuals, but they had wonderful stuff to say, and a lot of that filters into the script. Actually, then there's another way of looking at it, which is that Tony Darrow and James Lorenz, too much of that filtered into the script. Right. That was a different story. That was like, guys, could you just put this word back in so we can transition to the next scene? But they were great.
Now, the setting is so bleak, and I lived in New York for 7 years, but I lived there now, which is like the Disneyfication of New York. Where on earth did you guys shoot this?
Well, at that time, the early 80s, New York was known as a union state, New York and California. The non-union filmmakers not only weren't allowed to mix and match like they are in all the other states, they weren't allowed to make films at all. And the unions would station people at every rental house in the morning, at 7 a.m. They'd see who was taking stuff out. And if it was people they didn't recognize, they'd follow them, and they would do stuff to interfere with the production.
Wow.
So we knew we couldn't shoot in Manhattan, so we shot in the Brooklyn-Queens border. And what we did is we sent students in for about 2 weeks with a station wagon, picking up 2 pieces of equipment a day, and the union guys would look and then go back to sleep. We slowly snuck everything out that we were renting so that we wouldn't come under their scrutiny.
Wow. Now, those areas that you shot in, those are now, I'm assuming, incredibly gentrified, and none of us could afford to live there.
A few of them are, but in Meltdown, we went back to some of those places, right? We revisited.
They'd been cemented over a little.
Yeah.
But they still, that
some
one
of them.
still looked,
some of them
the
still have
junkyard
the
still
edgy.
looked like.
Yeah.
I mean, nowhere near. I mean, well, the one thing I remember you were saying, we had a screening of this film a few days ago, and Roy, you were mentioning the genesis of the idea, partly also coming from the director, Jim Murrow, but people used to come up to the cars and actually clean the windshields, which you really don't see anymore. You see people standing on the side with flowers and stuff, but... It's
weird to consider that street trash, one purpose it serves is as a timepiece, but it certainly does, that scene was ripped right out of current, events and no longer applies, so it's nice to see it. The World Trade Center's in the background, of a couple of scenes. So.
One of the most real moments in Street Trash to me is the part where the girl just says to her husband or boyfriend, "Speed up! I don't want to stop at the light because then they come and then I have to look at them." And there's a painful realness to that, which is interesting.
Victoria is in all of my films.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the influences behind this, because the thing that struck me about watching it again this last week is how much is in this movie. Meaning, when I was a kid, I very clearly was like, oh, that's a horror movie, obviously. But, there's the whole Viper thing. There's like kind of the cop. There's like the mafiosa guy.
And it's ridiculously socially aware.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. And I remember you saying at the screening that there were also a lot of investors involved. There's something like 90-something people were investing in this. So how did you sell it to them? Did you tell them this is a horror movie or this is this type of movie? Like, I'm just curious how you sold what Street Trash was going to become, because it seems like an amalgamation of so many different types of things.
Right. Investors generally, non-industry investors, don't know how to read scripts. And so that's the last thing we would give them. But they can read an outline as part of a business proposal. But I had read an interview in Playboy with Robert Altman, where he said that for his entire career, he always prepared 2 screenplays, one for the artists and one for the investors. And that made an impression on me, So there was a version of the script in case they needed to see it, which was about 15 pages shorter. I'm sure you can imagine which scenes were not in there.
I'm assuming there was no penis tossing in that.
And I wish we'd had a camera on the investors at the premiere as they watched.
That's great.
That was something. But I think we pushed it as a horror film and possibly as a comedy. Although when it came time to distribute it, Witten, I was saying, what genre are you pushing this in? He says, we're going to create a new one, art gore. And I said,
like that.
Yeah. I said, I did too. And I could see where there were a number of films coming out then that would have fit into that category.
And can you just kind of I discovered this on video. So what was kind of like the horror climate like at the time that this came out? Like this was a little bit after Evil Dead 2?
No, it was right at the same time.
Right at the same time?
That was the same year, yeah.
So what were some of the other movies that were going on in horror at the time?
Well, it almost seemed as if something hit our collective unconsciouses because Henenlotter was doing stuff right then. Buddy G was doing Combat Shock. Henry was being made, over in Chicago. Reanimator, as you said. Our thing, yeah, it was like a strange. Greg Lamberson, with Slime City, a strange upcropping of these weird, excessive gore comedies.
Toxic Avenger.
Seems like they all have a lot of angst.
Yeah.
A lot of angst about society.
But particularly East Coast stuff.
Right, right.
And then after 87, it kind of ebbed because the market dried up. Some of the foreign markets dried up, and distributors were truly afraid to take a film like that. They were afraid that if they couldn't build it into a cult, that it would have nowhere else to go.
And you mentioned something about the Japanese market being a backup to the market the other day?
Well, that was one. That's what I'm saying. Japan loved these type of films. So there was always a fallback for companies like Vestron. If Street Trash didn't perform well in the theaters here, or even on video here, there were some foreign territories where it was just guaranteed to do great. Then after 87, it wasn't. Japan dried up, and then they stopped. And you can see it. Suddenly there were our versions of everything, including Romero's films.
Right. Well, you said something about a serial killer being the reason, or is that just one of the?
No, that's what I was told at the time, that they caught a serial killer in Japan, and his closet was filled with street trash and Dawn of the Dead and all those things.
And so it climbed up.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, Street Trash has such a specific kind of eclectic look with the day glow melting and everything. And I know I've interviewed Jennifer Aspinall on how she created some of the effects, but was the day glow look of it, who did that come from originally? That was all you.
Yeah. But talk about this. I am quick to admit, since I'm proud of my work, but I'm quick to admit my naivete. I thought that doing the meltdowns in those beautiful colors would get us an R rating. What was I thinking? Within weeks of that thing coming out, I realized the film would have had to be 20 minutes long to get an R rating. You know, it was just so pervasive. But towards the end, one of the workers, played by Glenn Andreev, is stabbed in the neck by Bronson. He thinks it's the kid, and real blood comes out. Audiences reacted in shock to that because the color, the multiple color stuff really is kind of soothing and fun,
right?
And that's one of the few scenes where there's real blood, and it has a different effect on audiences. And
you also got laced with some of that Viper effect gore on your face. You're the guy looking up.
Yeah.
Very smooth looking man back there with the
I'll tell you,
the suit.
The crew liked me, but after the film was 12 and a half weeks of shooting, and after a while, getting paid as little as they were, they had mixed feelings about me. And that meltdown was saved towards the end, and they were so thrilled to see me get glopped. And Mike Lackey, who was up on the fire escape dropping the stuff, unerringly would move it slightly to the side, so I'd have to get redressed and do it in another suit, And yeah, that was kind of a friendly revenge.
Therapeutic. Okay, so I asked you before the show, but we're going to ask now. When I was researching different covers and poster designs, I noticed that one of them said Street Trash, but it was very clearly the cover of the movie Chud.
It was so amusing.
How does that happen?
Well, that just happened, I think, because this was a Scandinavian sale, and I was at Cannes when that sale was made, and the buyers came by with their kids, amazingly enough, and our foreign sales agent was repping 25 films and was just showing the previews for each one. That's all these sales guys would have time to look for. They'd go to, and this is generally what they do, they'll go to the screenings of the feature for 5 minutes each, just to make sure the sound is good, that this thing is on a professional level.
That's still how it's done. If you go to AFM, you stay for exactly 10 minutes, and then you walk out.
10 minutes tops. Yeah, if you're a good sales, buyer, right. you can't stay long, even if you like it. You have to find the stuff you like. So, in addition, they would come up to the suite that Howard Goldfarb had. He was our sales rep, and they'd watch all the trailers. And the kids, and these were young kids, they were not teens. They started laughing hysterically at the Street Trash stuff, and the guy bought it on the spot, and it was a big sale. you know. And I went to Cannes with that in '86 because we had gone substantially over budget, and the investors were getting nervous. And I came back with 3 territories sold, and we had over 100,000, and they relaxed, you know. So it was interesting to see it happen. But then, having gotten it, I don't know. We would send them artwork, you know, that we had prepared. We had several different approaches to it. You know, there was like a lovely ensemble poster with all the bums, you know, and Nicole in the middle coming out of the fire. And then there was almost a thriller thing with the kid creeping amongst all those disembodied car parts, looked like something out of Alien, you know. And then there was the toilet melt, and they used Chud. I don't get it.
I mean, how are they even allowed to use Chud?
I don't know. But I got, when I was sent a copy of it, because with each licensing deal, they would have to send me what they were doing, and this thing came in. It was unbelievable. Now, another interesting thing was the first year I went from marketing convention to marketing convention. I went to the AFM, I went to MIFED in Milan, I went to Cannes. And our sales agent was pretty straightforward because I was the only producer out of 25 films that showed up, but I wanted to learn about it, you know, how it was done. After the first year, it didn't seem necessary for me to go, and then he started making deals without letting us know. So the film started showing up. Like one of my students was in Italy in the summer and said, Street Trash is all over Italy now, but it's under a different name. And I checked, and it was called Horror on Bowery Street.
That's a good title.
And I've got the poster. It's lovely, but that was being done because the guy didn't want us to know.
Wow. Street Trash 2, Horror on Bowery Street. That's got a nice ring.
It does.
Did you ever think about doing a sequel?
Well, I have a sequel written. It's a reimagining. You were talking about a reimagining before. It's Street Trash 3 because I think too many years have gone by. It's too late for 2.
We can't go to 2. We got to go to 3.
But it is. You'd be pleased to read it. It is as offensive as the first, if not more so.
And you can use the cover of Chud 2. Street
That's
Trash.
funny.
You can just steal it.
only in Scandinavia.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one thing while you're here, because I mean, it was fun to hear more about Street Trash, but one of the things for horror fans, I'm sure that you'll be best remembered for is the incredible Document of the Dead, your work with on George Romero's film. How did you meet George? How did all that kind of begin with Dawn of the Dead?
I was working on my first film. It was called The Projectionist. It's a cult film. But in 1971, cult meant financial disaster. Had a slightly different
right. We've romanticized it.
Yes. And we ran out of money 5 times on that film, and I was kind of in charge of raising money, really trial by fire. And we decided to do a horror film at one point. I had a friend who was a classmate who had made a lot of money, and he wanted to invest in a film. And we figured, okay, we'll make a horror film. We'll write it in a week, shoot it in 2 weeks, edit it in 2 weeks, get it out there, and take the money and put it into The Projectionist. And when we were done, or no, actually before we shot, Harry Hurwitz, who directed The Projectionist, and I were in Times Square, and we said, let's see what kind of stuff's out there that we're going to take. We're very, but we thought we were really great. and we're walking down 42nd Street, and he says, here's one, Night of the Living Dead. Oh, let's go see this piece of crap. And we go in there, and 90 minutes later, we come out saying, we can't take that. I mean, it was like ridiculous.
A real movie.
This is what they're making,
Yeah.
you know? So shortly afterwards, I saw George at the Museum of Modern Art talking about Night, but also saying that he didn't want to be stuck in the genre. He had some other good ideas and stuff. He seemed such a wonderfully affable guy. Okay, so now I'm teaching, and there are no making of films, no teaching films out there about independent films. There's just all stuff about Star Wars and Butch Cassidy and stuff. Nothing students could relate to. Some things they wouldn't do for 10 years, you know, if they were lucky. And so I proposed to the School of Visual Arts that they fund a series of teaching films on filmmaking, and they came through. And then, because of that same union problem that I spoke about earlier, I had to look outside of New York for something getting made. Earl Owensby was doing a remake of The Wolfman in North Carolina, and he was very interested. And George was doing Dawn of the Dead up in Pittsburgh. So I knew George's producer, Richard Rubenstein, socially, and I asked if we could go up there. And he saw the promotional value of a featurette. I'm still being told that there were none prior to Document of the Dead about independent films, that was like the first. So 2 carloads of us went up there to Pittsburgh and shot, for 3 days, and then 1 day later during editing, and 1 day later when they ranged for distribution. So we had the whole arc of the production, and it was supposed to be the first, like in a series of teaching films, and this one was supposed to just encompass. Everything was supposed to be encompassed in this, and then each subsequent film would just hit one area, but there were no subsequent films. But that's the history of Document. And if you look at it now, the new one is called The Definitive Document of the Dead. Each time, every 10 years, I'd add a new chapter, catch up with what George had been up to. And the style completely changed, because the first act is a teaching film, and we're being very pedantic about what we're seeing, By the time we hit the third act, which you haven't seen yet, it was just all about my friends. Same as Meltdown Memoirs. I just became much more personal about making these documentaries,
Was there a sense of something you were witnessing, something special on the set of Dawn, or does it just seem like you're watching a zombie film?
Well, we sure didn't know, and neither did George or anyone else, that we were on the set of the Gone with the Wind of the horror genre. Really? Nobody sensed it. In fact, everyone was a little apprehensive that they were doing a film that was too far outside of the genre. It was very op art colors, and it was war. It was like a war film with these guys holed up in there and doing all their maneuvers, and funny.
You were kind of laughing at the zombies outside trying to get back in at the start.
Yeah. You were talking. I just want to interject. You were talking about the Wreck films and the sense that breaking the continuity, but that it worked. And Dawn, I don't know if I can think of, maybe Alien, but I don't know if I can think of another franchise or series where the first 2 are so completely different.
Right.
And then the third one was kind of disappointing to me, because I really was expecting it to be just as remarkably different than the first 2. And there were funding problems, that George ran up against, and it was not the film that he had planned on making. And yet, I recently asked him, what's the favorite, what's the best film he ever made, and what's the favorite? Because I think those are 2 entirely different things. And the best he thought was Martin, and I agree with him.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But the favorite, get this, was Day of the Dead. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah, just because I had such a wonderful time doing it. It may have started, may have gotten off to a bad start, but I have the most fond memories. Interesting.
Day's my favorite, believe it or not.
Really?
George's, yeah. I mean, again, it's all what you bring to a movie when from personal experience. And at the time I saw it as a kid, I think it's some of Tom Savini's best effects work ever. I mean, as a kid, I could not, when the autopsy and the zombie gets up and everything spills out, my little mind could not comprehend it. But I don't know. It was one of the first horror movies where I cared about kind of the drama of it all. And it's funny because I rewatched it recently, and I feel like the whole Walking Dead formula is totally just Day of the Dead.
I think that's the most.
It's a small group of people kind of arguing about what they're supposed to do in this post-apocalyptic world.
And it's the bleakest tonally. And I think that could have been why it's Dawn is a very fun film to watch and enjoyable, and that's probably why it's so popular. Yeah. But I think it's definitely a very bleak tone, which also carries through on Walking Dead, really. I mean, there's no hope in Walking Dead. I mean, we're watching a TV show about a bunch of people who are all infected anyway.
Yeah.
And when they died, and so far there's been no clues as to is there a cure, is there a place to go? We don't know anything.
Yeah. Well, so, I feel like Day of the Dead has that. Yeah, I agree. That feel, that tone to it. And
yeah, it's interesting.
I like it a lot. I mean, I like all those movies, but I like that one the best.
Yeah, he does seem like somebody who probably could have succeeded in other genres making. There's something in his personality from interviews that you do get that feeling he was smart enough to have probably made other kinds of films. But
they love to keep you in the genre that makes money,
Right.
I mean, another example is Wes Craven, who's my oldest friend in the biz. And after Last House on the Left, I saw that with 2 friends. One was Bob Harris, the guy that restored Lawrence of Arabia and Rear Window and all, and he walked out. I mean, he couldn't take it. My other friend stayed, but thought it was the only film he'd ever seen that made a case for censorship. I loved it. I'm sitting there, saying to myself, I'm not going to say what I think, but my goodness. So I said, I could tell it was a first-time director. I could tell it was shot in 16 millimeter. I wanted to tell him I liked it, so I wrote down the name of the company, and I sent him a note. And 2 weeks later, this box arrives, big box. I opened it up, and it's all the outtakes, all the scripts, with all of his notes and everything. And he says, if you like it that much, you can have it. He said the crew spit at me at the screening. He said, I feel like I've contributed bad vibes to the world, And, we became very friendly after that.
And he's another one of these guys who people who meet him say he's one of the nicest guys, right? Just like George.
Just like George. He is a nice guy. And he had other scripts that were non-horror that he was dying to do, was not allowed to do.
Right. We got one chance, right?
Yes, he did. And I was on the set of that. And I got to tell you, Wes, he said, I've made a lot of films by now, and I consider myself professional, but working with Meryl Streep is scary. Right. And I was, when they were shooting up in Harlem, and I was sitting there watching her, and she was very kind of into what she was doing and kind of walking around. She didn't seem threatening at all, but she must have had such an incredible sense of professionalism.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you think his career was already on that trajectory from Last House on the Left? See, I assumed it would have been more from Nightmare. Once you do Nightmare, you can't.
The Hills Have Eyes.
No, The Hills Have Eyes. No, what he was doing was each decade. I mean, I think he's the long-lasting success story we have in horror, and
the biggest trendsetter. That's for sure.
Yeah,
in the genre.
But I mean, who else has had like major hits like that in 3 decades?
Right.
So no, after Last House, there was Hills Have Eyes, as you said, and then Nightmare, and then the Scream thing. I mean, it just never stopped,
right.
And he had an article he wrote in the New York Times 2 weeks ago. I don't know if any of you saw it. Not in the entertainment section, I guess in the living section, ironically. And and the title was "Retirement is worse than any horror film I ever made." and I emailed him. I said, "Wes, whatever you were going to do, I was going to follow your plan. Now I don't know about this."
So he's retired. He is.
The article suggests maybe it was premature. So.
Right. Yeah. And we have a mutual friend, Oren, who was part of the reason I was able to get you here. And he wrote this to me, so I'm going to ask you now. And if it has to be edited out, he said, if you talk to him about the definitive document of the dead, ask him about his recent screening in Germany.
Oh,
does
funny.
This mean anything?
Of course it does.
Okay.
I wrote a little song.
Forget I asked. Let's.
And there is a woman in Amsterdam that records my music. Does the lyrics sings the lyrics to my music. And this was a little song. This was Greensleeves. It was called Zombie Greensleeves, and it was the whole melody of Greensleeves, but it was about the living dead spreading throughout the world. And then I was invited to this symposium on death in Hamburg, and it was a big thing. And there were very few filmmakers. It was mainly scientists, and it was all about how the concepts of death have radically changed and they're unclear. And the presentations and lectures were held in graveyards and morgues. I mean, it was a fantastic thing, and they flew me over. Partially because they couldn't get George, and but I told them I had a new version of Document of the Dead, and they were it would be the European premiere. So I'm presiding over the theater every day, and they're showing a kind of a history of zombies in film. They'd really done great research, and they had some footage that I'd never seen that I don't think exists here that they had dug up from other countries. Comes time for my film. And they're a very friendly group, and they were all bilingual. Everyone understood English. So I get up and I'm talking to them about George and about documents, setting up the experience, and they're all gung-ho. And you haven't seen the film yet, but it starts, and then maybe after a few minutes, there's some stop-motion animation I had done for it, and they're singing the song in Dutch, and it was saying the Jews are eating the Nazi spawn. And suddenly everyone stops laughing. And I realize I'm playing to a German audience, and it kind of never came back.
They deserved that.
Yeah, maybe
more.
But who would have thought when I wrote it that I'd be in front of that audience?
Too soon.
Really?
So I'm pretty sure that's what Oren meant.
Okay, that's pretty. I think you're probably right. That will do it. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited. One other thing I do want to mention, not so much a question, but we were lucky enough to see your short film that you called Swirly.
Yeah. I'm so glad I didn't start having really bad contractions till after that.
Yeah,
that was
that really was felt like I was watching a special film, a special idea. It just was very fun, very the performance is so straight in that costume that you really buy it. I'm curious because I hate talking about things that people can't see. Is there any way, or is there any future plan that people will be able to see this?
Well, as I said at the screening, in terms of currently Thursdays in my apartment.
Okay.
But in terms of the future plans, I mean, I have started in the last 2 years showing it at horror conventions and things,
Cool.
and the reactions are so extraordinary that I started talking to James Lorenz again. It was his project,
Right.
He was a Street Trash alumni,
He's the doorman for anyone listening.
Yeah, he's
Amazing.
the doorman, and
Improv.
he was a former student of mine who, at the time we made Street Trash, was a doorman at a movie theater in
That's
New
cool.
York. So I wrote the little part for him. It turned into a huge thing. In any case, he's very encouraged by the reaction it's getting, and he and I have been working on a much more kind of film noirish updated version.
Cool.
Yeah. So
I love the film noir concept with this. It's so awesome.
yeah.
And it's him as it's James as Mr. Softy.
Yeah.
Essentially,
more or less. I mean, Mr. Softy wouldn't give us rights.
Right, which
So
is-
Oh,
it's
yeah,
sort of-
we didn't do
so-
any setup, so people at home who haven't heard,
Like, what the hell?
He's
is
a
this
giant
guy?
ice cream cone.
Yeah,
like
his
literally,
head.
he's a giant ice cream guy.
Yeah.
and he's melting.
And he's got mafia problems too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stars in it and he directs, and he said it was like directing underwater because he couldn't hear the actor
right.
talking through that headpiece of his. Yeah.
But he had David Caruso, and if you get
Yeah,
David
that was
Caruso in your project now, you could probably get this thing funded. I mean,
That was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Isn't
could
that
take-
nice?
you could
Yeah.
take off the sunglasses in slow motion.
Yeah.
I think that'd be good. But anyway, it is really fun. I think you can see images and maybe even a bit of a trailer online somewhere.
Yes, I think there are bits. And
Yeah, so
pieces
people
of
can, if you track it down. But it's definitely worthwhile. I thought it was,
It was hilarious.
yeah, it felt like something unique, which was great. And missing in modern cinema, I often think, is the fantastic. We often talk about that, but
I love him and Frankenhooker, by the way, as the lead of that movie.
Yeah.
I think he's so because I'm from Long Island, and I feel like he embodies like a Long Island guy so perfectly in that movie. Just
Yeah.
the accent. and everything.
I think he made that film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, he's very good at improv, and there's a lot of improv, as there was in Street Trash by him.
Yeah.
And I'll mention that at that time he did the film, he was living across the hall from me. My son lives across the hall from me in New York, but my son was in Houston for a year, and James was living there, and the scene that they were shooting with all the hookers exploding,
Yeah.
all the hookers came back to his apartment, and there was a lot going on that night.
nice.
Memories.
Yeah.
Memories.
Well, we're going to just do a quick wrap of the news, very
Yep.
brief news headlines from the week. So thanks so much for joining us,
A
Roy.
lot of fun.
Thanks so much.
So this week in news, we had two major horror films open, Stoker and Last Exorcism. But as a whole, it was a completely dismal weekend. Like movies
Is
just.
Stoker a horror movie?
Except, wait.
I would question that too.
I do have one more tie-in. The film that was #1 at the box office this weekend was what film?
Jack the Giant Slayer.
Jack the Giant Slayer. I wonder if it has
Was
any
it really?
connection to our guest tonight.
Mm,
The director of Jack and the Giant
yeah.
Slayer was the penis wrangler
that's
of
true.
Street Trash.
Are you serious?
Mr. Brian Singer.
Oh my gosh.
Rebecca, you missed the Q&A.
So-
I totally missed the Q&A.
How fun is that?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, he made just $28 million this weekend, but
Yeah.
they're thinking that it's going to be higher next weekend.
Okay.
So,
So there you go.
well, that's awesome.
But
Penis
that's a good-
Wrangler makes $28 million.
But I do think that's great for the dreamers out there. You know, you're a PA on a film, and you've
Yeah.
got the lowest job on a film, you know, being the penis wrangler. And
One day you might have the X-Men franchise.
yeah, you might be
I'm
making
going
Usual
to tell
Suspects.
my students this story
I think it's
in
great.
future. Like,
You know?
don't give up, guys.
Oh, that is
coming.
great.
So yeah, that Last Exorcism came in #4 this weekend. Last Exorcism Part 2, which is just kind of an ironic title to
Right.
begin with, but comes in at $8 million is all it made. So it did pretty bad. Chandler's Park Stoker, which is questionably a horror film, Rob G. Well, it only opened in 7 theaters, which I didn't know it was doing such a limited open.
Platform, yeah.
Yeah, but it made $158,000, which is like $22,000 per theater. So it didn't actually do that bad. So I don't know if they're going to expand the opening now.
I've heard nothing but good things, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to hear. I'm like you. I don't want to know
Yeah,
until
I
I
just
see
want
it.
to go in and see it.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I saw a long cut of it because I went to the press junket, and they showed us like a 20-minute segment, and it looked awesome.
Okay.
So
cool.
Tribeca Midnight announced their whole run. I'm surprised. I have not heard of most of the movies that they're showing this year. Raz,
Yeah.
VHS 2, which I have heard of, Mr. Jones, The Machine, Fresh Meat, Frankenstein's Army, and Dark Touch.
Frankenstein's
I'm not
Army.
familiar with like any of those.
Yeah, Frankenstein's Army looks kind of steampunky, so that one's kind
I've heard of that one.
Yeah, that's the only one I knew of, though. Netflix is going to start showing Eli Roth's Hemlock Grove on April 19th. It's the TV show that he created. There's 13 episodes, and it's kind of a murder mystery.
That's my birthday.
With what's her name from The Faculty, Franka Jensen.
Franka Jensen, who I know from Star Trek.
Frumkes.
But yeah.
All right.
Let's see here. William Moody, who is also known as Paul Bearer, for those of you guys who are WWE or WWF fans, died this
Neither
week.
me nor
It's like
Elric.
speaking
come
Greek to
on.
me.
We're both nodding now.
As soon as I realized it wasn't real, I tuned out. As a
Okay.
kid, I was like, "This is great." Oh, it's not real.
Casting The Sixth Gun. NBC is casting for a new supernatural Western film based off the comic book The Sixth Gun. So that's coming up. Probably not this fall, but it'll be the following season. Mama has been pushed up and is now being rushed to DVD on April 23rd.
Good for me.
Yeah, I get to watch
I get
it
to see
finally.
it.
Yeah, I know. You can probably see it. The
Poltergeist?
Bay hit DVD yesterday, which I'm totally psyched about, and I still think that it's an awesome movie. So if you get the chance, go rent The Bay, which I loved. And then the last one is, and this one just cracks me up. So the producers of Dexter released a statement saying that they would probably not be coming back again after the 8th season. And then Showtime released a statement saying that they would neither confirm nor deny this. so nobody knows if Dexter's coming back.
If only we
But
had a
all have
Dexter
statements.
expert on hand.
I'm not allowed to say. What
Okay,
I
he's
know.
not allowed to.
Oh, you know.
He has knowledge.
Ooh, Rob G's got
I haven't seen the
inside
last
scoop.
last season. This last season I haven't
Season
seen. so
7 is fantastic.
Okay, I need to
think.
catch
and
up.
I'm not just saying that because I was there. And
It
I'm
could have
biased,
been the
but it's
finale.
really good.
If they had ended it with the 7th
Well, don't
season,
tell
I would have
me
been like,
spoilers.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not giving spoilers. Just saying. Good
Yeah,
ending.
Watch it as soon as possible.
What about the only news story I saw today was that the Poltergeist remake got a
yeah.
director, and an interesting director, a guy who mostly does kids films, but one of them happened to be that animation Monster House,
Yeah.
and that, what was that Bill Murray film where everyone's underground? All the children are underground. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a film that most people liked but didn't find a market. The name will come back to me.
Yeah.
But an interesting choice. It's Monster House is fun, but you wonder Poltergeist is not a family film in it, and the scares do have to kind of push the limits. And do we need a remake of a Poltergeist when a James Wan is
Kind of
channeling it
modern day
Yeah,
versions
doing
of
with
it now.
with his own
Yeah,
style?
because Insidious was very much to me.
It was.
I wouldn't say a remake, but it's in spirit a modern
It had the feeling.
Poltergeist.
Yeah.
Two quick things I wanted to mention. Number one, also out yesterday officially is the Nightmare on Elm Street Blu-ray box set.
Yes.
There was a UK import last year that was all region, so most fans probably already have that. And then back in October, Best Buy released it as an exclusive, where you could only buy it at Best Buy. But as of this week, it is now available everywhere, and it's pretty cool. It's nice having all the Nightmare movies on in high def. And there's a new featurette about. It's specifically about Freddy Krueger and Robert Englund, so that's like the one new bonus feature. And a few episodes of Freddy's Nightmares, which aren't that good to begin with, but nice to
I like
have them.
some of them. They weren't
Some
too
of
bad.
them, the ones
They
they
weren't
picked,
as good as the Friday the 13th series.
Sure,
But yeah.
different thing. But
Yeah.
I was surprised the two that they picked for the set. The pilot was directed by Tobe Hooper and kind of told the whole pre-story of him getting burned. I thought that would have been more suitable, but I don't know. Maybe it's a rights thing. So that was one thing. The second thing is, by the time this airs, I will be in Cherry Hill, New Jersey for Monster Mania.
That's awesome.
Which I'm pretty stoked. I'll be there repping FEARnet. So anyone listening that's on the East Coast, come down to the show, say hello, and maybe I'll give you some FEARnet swag.
Do you guys have a booth there?
We'll have a booth. We got the Crypt Keeper is going to be with us, a prop of the Crypt
I
Keeper.
was going to say, Mark, you're taking
No.
Mr. Showstrom? Or?
No, it's a puppet, and John Kassir is actually there, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Mhm.
Oh,
And
nice.
He's going to do a special signing/photo op with our Crypt Keeper for an hour on Saturday, I think. But yeah, come on down. We'll have fun. I love Monster Mania, by the way. It's been like 5 years since I went.
It's one of my favorite conventions. I so
Yeah.
miss, that's the one thing I missed when I moved from New York is I don't get to do the East Coast conventions anymore.
Yeah.
Monster Mania was always really good. I liked Mad Monster in North Carolina is a great one.
Yeah, a lot of good East Coast shows,
I know.
which I kind of miss that too, which
Dragon
is why
Con.
I volunteered to go to this one.
That's awesome. My favorite East Coast show was always the one in Long Island, whose name is escaping me right now, but it was in Long Island at the college.
Yeah, but it wasn't strictly horror, right? It was sci-fi.
Yeah, it was sci-fi and
yeah.
everything.
I forgot the name of it, but I know which one you're
Con.
talking about.
Yeah.
Something Con.
Yeah. And I loved that one. But
Tweet Rebekah tonight if you know what
Somebody
she's
tell me the
talking
name
about.
of the con.
Answer.
Mike Koopmans, if you're listening, we went to this one. What is the name of this con?
And finally, if you live in Los Angeles and you like horror board games, which are very
It's very
specific.
eclectic. There's like 3 people
I was
out
actually
there.
shocked how many there are, but somebody, the guy who runs Creepy LA, is hosting an event at Jump Cut Cafe. But it actually sounds really fun because they're going to have different board games on. One of them is an Alfred Hitchcock game, which now I need to get my hands on, called Why. And it's kind of sounds like Clue, but it's called Why. There's all these like ghost games. I was shocked. I mean, the Escape from New York game. I mean, there's some fun looking stuff. And I've never been a huge board game guy, but my interest is peaked.
Are these like custom made games?
These are games that have all existed from
Did
the
he have
80s and
Yikes?
70s.
That was one I had when I was
I
a
know
kid.
you can look up their event page and there's all sorts of games they've announced. But I think it could be an interesting chance to get to see this kind and also it's a kind of a fun social idea. It's an experiment. I'm curious, so I will be there because I have no choice anyway. But
What
but
night
yeah,
is it?
I think it's next Monday. So
Excellent.
3 days after this air. But we better wrap because we've probably been on for a while.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
been another great. We're very lucky that Roy was able to fit us in, and really glad we're all big fans of Street Trash. So.
Thank you, Roy.
And good luck. We want to see Street Trash 3 happen.
Okay.
Yep.
The Revenge of Swirly, Street Trash 3. A crossover. Get Chud in there and you've got a franchise. All right, thanks for joining us at Killer POV. We will be back next week with a guest that at this stage looks very much like the producer of Birdemic 2,
Yes.
Jeff Gross, with some pretty amazing stories from set of that strange film.
Which means I have to watch.
Yeah, that means
Batshit crazy.
exactly.
stories.
It's going to be interesting. Okay, thank you for joining us and we'll see you next week.